He was 12 when he was finally adopted, and after years of being a ghost in the system, the words forever family felt like a dream. His new parents, the Hendersons, hugged him at the agency with wide and seemingly genuine smiles and promised he would never have to go through the fear and uncertainty of the group homes again. A boy starved for any semblance of affection, he believed them until he met their biological son, Tyler. They were the same age and grade, and with their similar builds and brown hair, they could have passed for brothers, but on the second week of living in their pristine, two-story house, Tyler came home from school with his face a thundercloud and beat the living daylights out of the new boy over a bad grade on a math quiz. The attack was swift and silent, leaving him bruised and utterly bewildered in the quiet hallway of his supposed new home. He didn't want to tell his new parents because in the world he came from, being a tattletale got you ostracized or worse, so he just made it very clear he was in pain by limping conspicuously and moving with the deliberate slowness of an old man. They were sitting at the polished oak kitchen table in a thick and uncomfortable silence when his new dad, Mr. Henderson, finally spoke with a voice laced with performative concern, asking Gerbert, "What on earth happened to you?" Before he could even formulate a lie, Tyler spoke for him with a cruel smirk playing on his lips, announcing with a casual air of pride that it was all him because he got an effing C in math class again. His new mom, Mrs. Henderson, reached across the table and her manicured fingers closed around his hand with a cold touch as she explained in a smooth, practiced melody that Tyler has a severe academic anxiety that manifests as physical outbursts. She said the last foster child couldn't handle it because he was a lovely boy but too fragile, so they had to send him back after Tyler broke his arm. Dad quickly added, leaning forward, that he was different and stronger, a survivor who could handle this based on what they saw in his file about all the homes he survived and the things he endured. Knowing that a foster kid has to stand up for himself or be swallowed whole, he started in a voice barely a whisper that he wasn't really comfortable with being hit. His dad, Gerbert, interrupted with a firm voice as the facade of kindness dropped away to reveal cold steel, reminding him of the situation they took him out of where his innocence was violated almost every night and no one cared and he had to sleep on a cot in a hallway. His mom chimed in with a chillingly sweet voice like a velvet glove over an iron fist, saying it would be a terrible shame for them to have to send him back, especially since they'd already told everyone at church and school about their wonderful new son. At that moment, the pristine image of his new life shattered and the warmth of their hugs felt like a phantom limb, because he wasn't their son but a tool, a living, breathing coping mechanism for their violent, underachieving child, and Tyler's punching bag with a social security number. The only place he felt a sliver of normalcy was in his classes, where it turned out that even after years of educational neglect, he was really good at school. He absorbed information effortlessly and was soon getting straight A's without even trying, earning praise from his teachers for his insights and work ethic. This small island of success was his secret sanctuary because he knew if the Hendersons found out, they'd find a way to corrupt and use it, so for months he let them believe he was failing just like their loser son by forging their signatures on fake progress reports he'd made in the school library. He was sitting in his room at the end of the hall doing advanced calculus for fun when his mom burst in without knocking, her smile so bright it felt like a weapon, exclaiming that she and his father just got his report card which the school had mailed directly. She kissed his forehead with a dry, papery touch and he tensed up for the inevitable storm as she revealed they had no idea he was so smart, with straight A's while Tyler, on the other hand, got all F's. He asked with a hollow feeling in his stomach if she wanted him to tutor Tyler, already knowing the answer. Her tone shifted as the fake effervescence was gone and she said no, not really, and after a long, calculating pause where her eyes scanned his face as if measuring him for a suit, she continued that since they looked so alike, it would be for the best if he took Tyler's tests and Tyler took his, calling it the perfect solution. He wanted to scream no and tell them they're crazy, abusive family could count him out, but then the ghosts of his past rose up, the gnawing hunger of the group home, older kids taking his food, his innocence being stolen at age 6, and the constant, grinding fear of sleeping with one eye open. Even being Tyler's personal homework slave and academic stand-in was better than going back to that hell, so instead, he folded like a wet paper towel and exclaimed with a forced smile that felt like broken glass in his mouth that of course he was down. She left, taking his report card with her like a trophy, and the system started immediately. The following Monday morning during third period, he walked into Tyler's geometry class while Tyler slouched off to basic English, and the teacher barely glanced up from her novel as he walked to the back and wrote Tyler Henderson on the test paper, acing it 90 minutes later. Meanwhile, he later learned, Tyler was deliberately failing his test, covering the margins of Gerbert's paper with crudely drawn, lewd pictures. Despite his grades skyrocketing, Tyler never stopped hitting him, he just got more creative and sadistic, punching him in the ribs or the stomach where bruises wouldn't show during gym class, calling it strategic anger management. As a reward for his dramatic improvement, the Hendersons bought Tyler a brand new Mustang while Gerbert got a monthly bus pass. The worst part was the cognitive dissonance of watching teachers praise Tyler for his work, like when his deeply respected English teacher, Mrs. Garcia, pulled Tyler aside after he'd written a poignant, perfect essay on To Kill a Mockingbird under his name. She said with eyes shining with pride that it showed real emotional depth and asked if he'd consider joining the literary magazine, but he just laughed in her face with a loud, braying sound and sneered that reading is for losers. She just shook her head with a sad smile, thinking he was just being a modest, self-deprecating teenager. By sophomore year, Tyler had fully embraced the power of his fraudulent success and would strut through the school hallways like he owned the place, regaling anyone who would listen, especially the pretty girls at parties, with the story of his academic comeback. He'd say with a borrowed swagger that he used to be stupid, but then he just decided to lock in because it was mind over matter. Those words, mind over matter, circled in the boy's head like sharks, his mind, his matter, so much so that for the next history midterm he took under Tyler's name, he purposely did badly, getting not an F, but a quiet act of rebellion in the form of a C-. His petty reign of terror was brutally cut short the day the report cards came out, when his dad dragged him out of bed at 3 a.m. with his face contorted in a silent rage, hauled him to the bathroom, and forced his head into the toilet bowl, flushing it again and again until he was choking on water and bile in a way he hadn't experienced since a particularly sadistic foster home. When he finally gasped out that he'd never do it again and that he'd be good, his dad patted his soaked, shivering head like he was a dog who'd learned not to pee on the carpet and whispered in a calm and terrifying voice, "Good boy, now go make Tyler breakfast, he has a big test today." That's when he stopped being angry and started being smart as the rage cooled into a diamond-hard resolve, realizing they'd shown him exactly what they were, criminals who torment a child to protect their precious image. And criminals, no matter how clever they think they are, always make mistakes. He stood in the gleaming, silent kitchen making Tyler's eggs exactly how he liked them, sunny side up with the edges crispy, while his mind raced, cataloging every bruise, humiliation, and stolen grade. The fresh aches from last night throbbed under his shirt as a grim reminder of his new reality, and he knew he'd need to document them later, but right now he had to play the part of the perfect, compliant foster son, his hands moving automatically like a puppet on a string, buttering the toast just right and arranging everything on the plate with the precision Tyler demanded. The breakfast table felt like a minefield that morning as Mrs. Henderson sat across from him sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone with that fake, brittle smile plastered on her face. She looked up suddenly with a disturbing excitement in her eyes and said, "Oh, Gerbert, I almost forgot, Tyler's SAT is coming up next month." She stirred her coffee with a casual flick of her wrist and added that her friend, Brenda, who works at the testing center, is very understanding about Tyler's special needs and can make sure he gets the right room with no questions asked. His stomach dropped like a stone in a well because taking his regular tests was one thing, a sick, twisted family secret, but the SAT was federal, real prison time fraud. He kept his face a neutral mask, focusing on the meticulous task of cutting his eggs into tiny, even squares. As if on cue, Tyler reached for the coffee pot and his elbow accidentally knocked it toward him, splashing the scalding black liquid across the back of his hand. He bit down hard on his tongue, the coppery taste of blood filling his mouth as he refused to flinch or pull away while the heat seared his skin. Tyler watched him closely with narrowed eyes, muttering "Careful there, foster boy," with a flicker of confusion, because he could see the wheels turning in his head and knew something had changed in him since that 3 a.m. wake-up call. At school, he became a ghost, keeping his head down and moving through the hallways with a silent, unobtrusive purpose. His hand throbbed, a blistering red reminder of the morning's casual cruelty, but he couldn't go to the nurse because that would lead to too many questions he couldn't answer. He slipped into English class just as the bell rang, and Miss Garcia called from her desk, "Gerbert, can I see you for a moment?" His heart hammered against his ribs as he approached, and she waited until the other students were settled before speaking in a low murmur of genuine concern, saying she'd noticed some bruising on his arms and that he'd been moving stiffly lately. Her dark, intelligent eyes searched his as she asked if everything was okay at home. The truth wanted to spill out so badly it was a physical ache in his chest, but he thought about the Hendersons' reputation, their generous donations to the school, and how everyone in town saw them as saints, so who would believe a troubled foster kid over them? He lied with smooth and practiced words that he'd just been playing basketball at the park and got a little too competitive. She didn't look convinced, a small frown line appearing between her brows, but she nodded slowly and said her door was always open if he ever needed to talk about anything. During lunch, he sat alone in his usual corner of the loud, chaotic cafeteria while Tyler held court at the popular table, his voice carrying across the room as he bragged to his sycophantic friends that his grandparents set up a trust fund for college that only kicks in if he gets into a top-tier school, so it was a good thing he turned his grades around for Harvard. His friends laughed and slapped him on the back, and when one of them asked how he'd managed such a dramatic, almost miraculous, improvement, Tyler shrugged, puffed out his chest, and said he just stopped being lazy because it turns out he's actually a genius when he applies himself. The sandwich in his hands turned to cardboard in his mouth as he realized they weren't just using him for high school but that this was their long-term plan, a multi-year heist to ride his intelligence all the way to Tyler's trust fund, and he wondered how many years they would keep him trapped in this gilded cage. After school, he trudged up to his room, the weight of the day pressing down on him, but as soon as he opened the door, he knew something was wrong from the faint scent of Mrs. Henderson's cloying perfume hanging in the air. His dresser drawers were slightly ajar, papers on his desk had been moved, and his journal, the one he'd hidden under his mattress, was gone. A cold, sickening panic flooded through him. As he tore apart his room checking every possible hiding spot, because that journal had everything, his meticulous documentation of Tyler's abuse, the test swapping scheme, dates, times, and damning details. Without thinking, he stormed downstairs to the kitchen where Mrs. Henderson stood at the counter calmly chopping vegetables for dinner and demanded with a shaking voice, "Where is it?" She didn't look up from her work, asking "Where's what, dear?" and he replied, "My journal, you took it." The knife paused mid-chop and she turned to face him, still holding it as the polished blade caught the overhead light, and said with a voice as sweet as poison, "Privacy is earned, not given, Gerbert." Her knuckles were white as she gripped the knife handle and brought it down on a large carrot with an unnecessary, violent force, splitting it in two as she added, "We're a family, And families don't keep secrets from one another. He stared at the knife in her hand and at the cold, dead smile on her face, the message received loud and clear. That evening, he found his journal lying on his bed as if placed there for him to find, with several pages torn out, the ragged edges a silent, mocking testament to their violation. He could see Tyler's greasy fingerprints on the torn pages, a deliberate and taunting calling card, as every entry about the abuse, every piece of documented proof, was gone. At dinner, Mr. Henderson made a casual announcement as he cut into his steak, his eyes flicking towards Gerbert for a fraction of a second, saying they decided to upgrade their home security with cameras throughout the house for everyone's safety. When Gerbert asked where exactly, struggling to keep his voice steady, he smiled a predator's smile and said all the common areas, hallways, the front and back exits, and that they'd have monitors in their bedroom to keep an eye on things and make sure everyone is safe and sound. They were closing every escape route and building a digital prison around him, where even his room wouldn't be private anymore with a camera in the hallway monitoring every time he left or entered. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, his only real friend at school, asking to hang out this weekend since they hadn't seen each other in forever, and he stared at the message as a fresh wave of despair washed over him, realizing how completely and systematically the Hendersons had isolated him. Late that night, long after the house was quiet, he crept to the bathroom and locked the door, his hands shaking as he pulled out his phone and set the camera's timer function. In the harsh light of the vanity, he carefully and methodically photographed each bruise and ugly mark Tyler had left on his body, the camera flash illuminating the ghostly purple fingerprints on his arms and the angry red welts across his ribs. He created a new, password-protected folder on his phone and labeled it Tyler's Achievement Awards, assuming if they found it, they'd think it was academic stuff, the bitter irony not lost on him. Just as he finished, the bathroom door handle rattled violently, so he quickly shut off his phone, flushed the toilet, and ran the sink for cover. Tyler stood in the hallway when he opened the door, his eyes cold and calculating as he demanded to know what he was doing in there for so long. Gerbert said he was using the bathroom and tried to push past him, but Tyler shoved him hard against the wall, his forearm pressing into his throat and cutting off his air, hissing, "I know you're planning something, foster boy. I can smell it on you." He met Tyler's gaze steadily, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a struggle, and said he wasn't planning anything. Tyler steadied his face for a long, tense moment before releasing him with a final, contemptuous shove, saying, "Good, because if you try anything at all, you'll wish you were back in that group home getting passed around like a party favor." The next morning, Mrs. Henderson dropped another bomb at the breakfast table, beaming with a cheerfulness more terrifying than any threat as she announced she'd volunteered to be a parent liaison at his school. She would be there every day, helping in the office and maybe even sitting in on some classes, exclaiming how wonderful it was that she'd get to see her two boys so much more, and just like that, his safe space, the one place he could breathe where he wasn't just foster boy, was gone. During study hall that day, he managed to grab the family iPad while Mrs. Henderson was schmoozing with another parent volunteer, his fingers flying across the screen as he opened the Messages app and scrolled back through old conversations until he found it. It was a thread from someone named James, dated 6 months ago, pleading for help because he couldn't take it anymore and Tyler had broken his ribs this time and he was scared. The messages stopped abruptly after that, with the last desperate plea reading, "Please don't let them hurt me anymore." This was James, the previous foster kid, the one whose arm Tyler had broken, but these messages suggested something so much worse, a pattern of terror he was now a part of. In chemistry class, Tyler slipped him a note with his test answers, which were all wrong in a deliberate act of sabotage, so he had to correct them on the fly while the teacher watched, making it look natural. As he subtly changed each answer from a B to a C, he felt her eyes on him, a flicker of suspicion in their depths. Mrs. Henderson, in a new role as school watchdog, scheduled a parent-teacher conference for him during his library period, his only unsupervised hour of the day, meaning now he'd have to sit there, a silent prop, while she and his teachers discussed Tyler's remarkable improvement, praising his work under Tyler's name. He decided to try the school counselor one last time, choosing his words with the care of a bomb disposal expert, saying he was worried about a friend in a bad situation at home and avoiding her gaze. Mrs. Patterson, the counselor, leaned back in her chair with an expression of mild boredom and asked what kind of situation. He explained that their family expects things from them and makes them do things they're not comfortable with. She frowned with a flash of annoyance and asked if he was by any chance talking about the Hendersons, because they are pillars of this community who have saved so many foster children and donated so much to their programs, and whatever he thought he was seeing, she was sure he was misunderstanding the situation. It was a dead end, another door slammed shut and locked. During Tyler's next test, he took photos of his actual, pathetic work before swapping their papers, F after F, a testament to his true abilities and more evidence. While organizing Mrs. Henderson's home office as part of his chores, he found a folder marked foster care containing documents that showed they received a check for $800 a month from the state for his care. But there was more. There were applications for other foster children, all with eerily similar notes scribbled in the margins: honor roll student, high academic potential, similar physical appearance to Tyler. They had done this before and were already planning to do it again. At Sunday dinner with Tyler's grandparents, he watched them fawn over their brilliant grandson, with his grandmother cooing that they always knew Tyler had it in him while patting his hand. Later, when no one was looking, she slipped him a crisp $20 bill and whispered it was for all his hard work, her eyes holding a hint of something, maybe pity or knowledge, and he realized she knew her grandson wasn't a genius and was complicit in her own way. Sarah, Tyler's sharp-witted ex-girlfriend, approached him after school one day, chewing on the end of her pen and saying it was weird how Tyler was always so epically dumb when they dated but then suddenly started writing brilliant, insightful essays. He chose his words carefully, saying people change, but she insisted not that much, not that fast, and pulled out her phone to show his old texts where he couldn't even spell definitely, yet now he was using words like ubiquitous in casual conversation. A seed of hope, small but persistent, began to sprout as Sarah's eyes lit up with righteous indignation, adding that he still can't explain his own essays, and when she asked him about the symbolism in his Mockingbird analysis, he went completely blank and just started talking about the movie. Tyler must have seen them talking from across the quad because that afternoon in the locker room, he cornered him with a face masked in fury, his fists finding all the familiar, tender spots that wouldn't show under a shirt as he hissed, "Stay away from Sarah, or I'll do a lot worse than bruise you." That evening at dinner, Mr. Henderson mentioned with chilling casualness that Sarah's father had just lost a major contract with his company, saying it was such a shame as he meticulously cut his roast beef without looking at Gerbert, the thread clear like a silken garrote tightening around his neck. Mrs. Henderson, doubling down on the humiliation, started requiring him to attend Tyler's social events as his tutor, the first being a pool party at a rich friend's house. He sat in a deck chair in the corner with a stack of textbooks while she introduced him to the other parents as Tyler's little charity case, the poor foster kid we've so graciously taken in. The humiliation burned worse than any physical bruise as he recognized the psychological torture for what it was. They wanted to break his spirit and grind him down until he was grateful for whatever scraps of existence they threw his way. That night, he started a new journal, this one hidden deep inside the torn lining of an old winter jacket in the back of his closet. A few days later, Marcus showed up at the house unexpectedly while Gerbert was on the living room floor surrounded by Tyler's calculus homework. When the doorbell rang, Mrs. Henderson answered, her smile faltering when she saw who it was. Marcus, bless his loyal heart, pushed past her politely but firmly, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Gerbert, his jaw tightening as he took in the scene of the boy buried in Tyler's assignments and the new, gleaming security cameras mounted in every corner like spiders. He saw the way Gerbert instinctively shrank when Mrs. Henderson moved toward him and mouthed a profanity that was clear across the room, having seen the fear Gerbert couldn't quite hide. As Mrs. Henderson recovered and led Marcus to the kitchen for a glass of lemonade, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, Gerbert managed to slip a folded, crumpled note into his back pocket with 4 words scrawled in desperation, "Help me. They're watching." Marcus palmed it smoothly, his expression never changing, and when he left 15 minutes later, he squeezed Gerbert's shoulder in a silent promise, the message received. The next morning, Gerbert used the library computer to create a backup email account the Hendersons knew nothing about and started forwarding him self-evidence. During lunch, he found a dusty old payphone near the gym that still worked, his hands shaking as he dialed child services, but the tinny hold music played for 30 agonizing minutes as he looked over his shoulder, expecting Mrs. Henderson to materialize at any moment, until he finally hung up in frustration, the system that was supposed to protect kids like him a broken, useless machine. Marcus started texting him in code, a brilliant system they devised based on a video game they'd never actually played, where need backup in this level meant he was checking if he was in immediate danger, boss fight tonight meant the Hendersons were on the warpath, and found a cheat code meant he had new information. He discovered Tyler's college application essays for Harvard, Yale, and Princeton in the school's recycling bin, all in his handwriting, his words, his ideas. He photographed each page with his phone before Tyler, who must have been following him, showed up and ceremoniously burned them in a trash can in the parking lot, watching him the whole time to make sure he didn't keep any copies. Sarah found him after school with her older sister, Catherine, standing beside her, a woman of maybe 20 with tired eyes that held a world of knowing. She'd gone to school with James, the previous foster kid, and while the Hendersons had told everyone he'd been sent back to the system for being violent, Catherine knew better. James had run away, terrified for his life, and was now living in a homeless shelter 2 towns over, still looking over his shoulder. At dinner that night, he carefully and casually mentioned James's name, watching their reactions as Mr. Henderson's jaw tightened like a vice and Mrs. Henderson's smile turned to plastic. Mr. Henderson explained with a dangerously calm voice that some children simply can't be helped because they are too damaged and too difficult, the lies rolling off his tongue like water. Through Sarah's sister, he tracked down James and they met at a grimy McDonald's halfway between their towns, where James looked smaller than expected, hunched over a cold coffee and flinching whenever the door opened. His hand shook as he told his story, a horrifying echo of Gerbert's own, with the test swapping, the grade fraud, and the strategic abuse, but when he tried to refuse the SAT scheme, they threatened to report him as violent and mentally unstable to every foster agency in the state so no family would ever take him and he'd age out on the streets. So he ran, leaving everything behind, and revealed that the broken arm Tyler bragged about was from a baseball bat, showing him the x-rays he'd kept as a grim souvenir of his time with the Hendersons. Cracks started showing in Tyler's facade as teachers began noticing the glaring disconnect between his brilliant written work and his monosyllabic verbal abilities, and whispers started in the faculty lounge. The Hendersons, sensing the tide turning, offered Gerbert a deal to continue being Tyler's brain through college and they'd pay for his education too, any school he wanted, but he refused the 4 more years of slavery. Teachers started comparing notes, with Miss Garcia remembering the distinct writing style from a foster student years ago and the math teacher recalling another bright kid who'd suddenly stopped attending and been sent back. The mask slipped during a parent-teacher conference when Mrs. Henderson snarled at him in the parking lot, her face a mask of rage, before catching herself and smoothing her features back into a serene smile. Marcus created a secure cloud storage account, and Gerbert smuggled out evidence on tiny USB drives hidden in the soles of his shoes, while Sarah did some digging and discovered her father's contract loss was due to a competitor's better bid, not to Henderson's influence. Their threat had been a bluff, a cruel power play. Their small network of Gerbert, Marcus, Sarah, and Catherine met secretly at Marcus's house, where they planned carefully and laid out their evidence. During a heated family argument about college applications, Tyler slipped up, yelling that he didn't even understand the essay he wrote about his personal hero, and Gerbert recorded the entire tirade on his phone, hidden under the table. James, emboldened by their support, agreed to provide a sworn, notarized statement. Tyler's girlfriend dumped him very publicly in the middle of the cafeteria, announcing that he was a fraud and dumber than a box of rocks, and the word spread like wildfire as a hashtag started trending locally. #HendersonHoax. Marcus's older brother, a law student, reviewed their mountain of evidence and his assessment was clear and exhilarating, multiple felonies including fraud, child abuse, and tax evasion, because the Hendersons had left a paper trail a mile wide. The SAT was 48 hours away, and at a school assembly on academic integrity, Gerbert stood up with his heart pounding and asked the principal, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium, what would happen to students who had others take their tests for them, and what about, specifically, SAT fraud. Tyler, sitting in the front row, began to visibly sweat as the principal's eyes narrowed, looking from Tyler to his parents in the audience, then to Gerbert, the question hanging in the air like a bomb. The house of cards was falling, and Mrs. Henderson made a last-ditch, frantic attempt to destroy evidence, but he'd hidden copies everywhere, including a USB drive in her own jewelry box, files on the school's server under a fake name, and photos backed up in multiple cloud accounts. They planned an emergency removal, claiming he was unstable and violent, but he'd already arranged to stay with Marcus's family with the paperwork already filed. When Mr. Henderson tried to physically grab him to prevent him from leaving, Marcus's father, a large, calm man, stepped between them as other parents, alerted by Marcus, materialized, watching from their lawns as witnesses everywhere. Tyler cracked completely during his grandparents' next visit when they arrived unannounced, armed with questions. When they asked him to explain the central thesis of an essay, he went blank, and the grandmother pulled out a printed copy, causing Tyler to stammer, his face turning a blotchy red as his grandfather's jaw tightened. That evening, Tyler cornered Gerbert, his usual arrogance replaced by raw panic, demanding he fix this. The next morning brought an emergency family meeting where the grandparents sat across from the Hendersons at the dining room table and Tyler's grandfather produced a folder of Tyler's actual schoolwork from elementary school, the clumsy handwriting, simple vocabulary, and C and D grades all contradicting the recent academic miracle. When his grandfather asked him to solve a basic algebra problem from his A+ homework, Tyler threw his pencil down and finally confessed everything in a torrent of angry, self-pitying bursts, including the test swapping, the fraud, the abuse, and even boasting about the baseball bat incident with James. Financial documents emerged from the grandfather's briefcase showing the grandparents had been unknowingly funding the exploitation by sending monthly checks for specialized tutoring. Mrs. Henderson's mask finally shattered as she screamed at Tyler for ruining everything and for being too stupid to maintain the lie. The grandmother stood, her face a mask of cold fury, announcing they were cutting off all financial support and tearing up the documents related to Tyler's trust fund, while the grandfather added that they'd be contacting their lawyer and the authorities. Child services arrived within hours, alerted by the grandparents, and Marcus's family had already filed the paperwork to serve as his emergency placement. The school board launched an immediate, full-scale investigation, and the community response was swift and brutal as former friends crossed the street to avoid the Hendersons and the family's church quietly suggested they find somewhere else to worship. Mr. Henderson tried one last, desperate manipulation by posting carefully edited videos of Gerbert online to paint him as a troubled, aggressive teen, but Marcus responded immediately by posting the full, unedited security footage from their own system, which showed Tyler attacking Gerbert moments before each of his aggressive reactions. The backfire was immediate and devastating as other former foster children who had lived with the Hendersons came forward, flooding social media with similar stories. The Hendersons' foster license was revoked, the IRS began an audit, and Tyler's college acceptances were rescinded one by one. Faced with complete social and financial ruin, the Hendersons agreed to sign over guardianship to Marcus's family rather than face a public, humiliating trial. Moving day came quickly, and Tyler made one last attempt at intimidation in the driveway, but his grandfather physically stepped between them. Marcus's family welcomed Gerbert with a genuine warmth he'd never known, his parents having prepared a real bedroom for him, not just a space to exist, and that first night, he slept without fear for the first time in years. The Hendersons listed their house for sale within a month and left town in the middle of the night, moving to a small, run-down apartment several states away as Tyler's Mustang was sold to cover moving expenses. The family that had built their entire existence on image found themselves with nothing but the ugly truth. The school implemented new oversight policies to protect vulnerable students, and scholarship offers arrived for him from unexpected sources as colleges that had followed the local scandal wanted to support the student who had shown such resilience. He and James stayed in contact, bonding over their shared survival and becoming resources for other foster kids in the system. 6 months later, he stood at a podium wearing the valedictorian sash over his graduation regalia, his speech touching on resilience, the courage to speak truth to power, and finding your own worth when the world tries to strip it from you. And the audience was his chosen family, Marcus and his parents, Sarah and Catherine, and the teachers who'd finally listened and acted, and even Tyler's grandparents were there, their presence a quiet, somber apology. His academic brilliance, no longer stolen for someone else's benefit, opened doors he'd never imagined, with full scholarships, research opportunities, and a future built entirely on his own merit. The intelligence they tried to exploit became his ultimate path to freedom. Tyler's grandparents established a scholarship fund for foster children pursuing higher education and insisted that he help select the recipients each year. He chose a college far from that town but carried its lessons with him, his story spreading through foster care networks not as gossip, but as guidance and a cautionary tale that empowered others. Tyler tried to contact him once with a long, rambling message about how he'd ruined his life, but he deleted it without responding because Tyler had learned nothing. The Hendersons had created a monster who believed he deserved success without effort, and now he was facing reality without their protection. He graduated summa cum laude, his achievements entirely his own, and the walk across the stage to receive his diploma felt different when it had his name on it, for work he had actually, finally, done for himself.